So I'm Chris Leggett. I am the program manager at the Central Florida International Trade Office. And I welcome everyone to CFITO's first webinar on how to make supply chains more resilient. For those of you who may not know, CFITO was established in 2014 with support from our initial sponsors, Orange County and JP Morgan Chase, who were later joined by the City of Orlando, in recognition of how exporting and importing both add value to the Orlando economy and create well-paying jobs. Located at the National Entrepreneur Center, CFITO helps connect local small businesses to the opportunities in the international marketplace through one-on-one counseling, hosting, visiting international business delegations, and providing events like this one to help companies learn how to safely engage in international trade. Sorry, I'm just got to let people in. I'm not adept at this quite yet. Oops. Push the wrong button. I'm also the Vice Chair for Trade Policy of the Central North Florida District Export Council, which is the other organization responsible for bringing this event to you today. The Central North Florida DEC is one of the 61 district export councils established by the U.S. Department of Commerce. Our mission is to complement the U.S. commercial services export promotion efforts, and our 30 members represent the interests of the U.S. exporting community and provide business counseling and mentorship on the export process, trade education through seminars and community outreach to encourage firms in our service area to export. And I'm happy to see that we have several DEC members on with us today. From the SBDC is Julia Montgomery, and we also have from JF Moran, Mary Robbins, who helped bring George Robson, one of our speakers, on board today. So I really appreciate the efforts that they make to help promote exporting in the region. I'm excited to let you know that in partnership with UCF, the DEC has just launched a Global Business Management Certificate Program for working professionals. So anyone interested can follow up with me for more information on this program or learn more on the DEC website at floridaexports.com. So I think this is a very timely event today, as we're starting to get out of the first phase of dealing with COVID-19 and the disruptions that that has brought to businesses in our region. And now, just as we personally are looking to start operating on a new normal, so are businesses, and people are starting to bring back their supply chains. Some people are looking to make changes to their supply chains, and we can talk a bit about that today. But just reestablishing supply chains in this new world that we're operating in is an important topic for small businesses. And we've got a lineup of great speakers here today to talk about that. We'll start with George Robson of JF Moran, who will talk about the state of logistics and how products are moving to markets around the world post-COVID-19. JF Moran is a woman-owned company and one of the longest-running custom brokers and forwarders in America. Established in 1937, they are strategically located in 8 cities, including Jacksonville, Florida. JF Moran is a full-service logistics company with over 20 licensed customs brokers on staff. George started his career with Customs and Border Protection at Chicago O'Hare, where his inspector's career was geared to cargo enforcement and passenger secondary processing. George was one of the first former CBP inspectors to start his own custom brokerage and forwarding company in America, and he's spent the past 24 years with his wife's family business, JF Moran, in multiple capacities, most recently as Executive Vice President. Next, we'll hear from Kim Kirkendall of International Resource Development, Inc., about best practices for optimizing your supply chains and refining them to better react to future challenges. Kim Kirkendall has over 30 years experience in international supply chains throughout Asia. She's currently the president of International Resource Development, Inc., where she consults with companies to develop, expand, or improve their operations in Asia. Our last presenter will be Samantha Soffici of IBT Online, who will provide an overview of how to buy and sell internationally using e-commerce while taking into account our new reality of social distancing. IBT Online has been in business since 2002, and their mission is to help exporters succeed in their target markets through website localization and international online marketing. That way, companies can be found, understood, and be easier to do business with internationally. Samantha is one of their online business development managers who's been with the company for 3 years. Located in Miami, Florida, she works closely with Enterprise Florida to help exporters succeed online globally. After the presentations, we'll have time for a Q&A session using the chat box. So hopefully everybody is familiar with how to use that. But you're always welcome to put questions in the group chat in the meantime if you have something that you urgently want to raise. And so I think we can start with George talking about the state of logistics globally. Over to you, George.
Good. Let's start off with this. Can everybody take like a snapshot of my Venmo barcode and Venmo me $100? And we're going to take that money and we're going to give it to the next presenter, Kim, who's got connections with manufacturers all over the world. And she's going to find someone that's manufactures 2-ply toilet paper. And then we're going to put it in our containers and ship it to the United States. And then after that, Samantha's going to take it and use her e-commerce connections and market it. And we're all going to make a lot of money. So that's how we're going to start. So I made everybody money right now. All right, the supply chain. Supply chain, more resilience. Okay, the definition of resilient, able to withstand or recover quickly from difficult conditions. So I think we all understand that COVID-19 is definitely a difficult condition. You're gonna get the view from a transportation person, forwarder, customs broker. So it's gonna be, I'm gonna have that edge as far as what the view is going to be. The supply chain on our side was solid. It's in great shape. It was the best ever going in before, and it withheld the contracting that COVID did to that. So now we've contracted the supply chain as far as the transportation goes. Buckle up, it's gonna get a little bumpy on the way here. So ocean freight. The ports were terrific. They didn't skip a beat. They had issues with their staffing because they're getting sick. Most of the staff for all the transportation companies involved are professional, and they're usually seasoned, which means they've had quite a few years in. So it's not like you could get temps to come in and take their place. So a lot of them, which there was an issue at the ports right away because of the viruses hitting the major ports and the people getting sick. But it seems that they got through that, so that was an issue. Port security stayed the same. That stayed excellent. So no one had to worry about any issues that would compound the issue of just COVID in our lives. So that's something that really U.S. Customs and all the local law enforcement agencies that handle the ports, that they should be proud of, that they kept that going. That stayed the same. That never changed. Ocean rates. Ocean rates at that time could have went. They could have gotten a lot higher. Okay, but they didn't. They actually stayed pretty good, especially out of Asia. Which surprised a lot of people because when we compare it to air freight rates, it's night and day. So that was good. So the rates were pretty much held their own. They didn't go up quite a lot. The workforce in the different ports, because eventually a lot of people started working out of their houses and do it remotely. They had call centers. That was an issue because their phone numbers were probably the only ones they were using were cell phone numbers. So when if you couldn't get anything online and you actually had to talk to someone, it was difficult, and it still is a little bit, but it's getting better. So that's something I think that everybody realized that when they were working at home, their companies were working at home. If they didn't have anyone in the office, that was an issue. If they didn't, because going into that, they didn't have anything set up where those calls could go directly to their people. If you're going to ship, as far as any freight in and out, I suggest put them in an ocean container, put it in a 20-footer, put it in a 40-footer, okay? If you think you need it right away, there's been a lot of history that happened since COVID where air freight, ocean freight, if it left China today and you got here, let's say in 3 weeks into Los Angeles, it was beating air freight. Okay, and a lot of times the air freight, when it got into the United States, the airports, it just sat there. So put it on an ocean container. You're going to get it here. You know you're going to get it here. You know that U.S. Customs is going to clear it. Your forwarder, your broker will be able to get a trucking company that will be able to haul that container. So I suggest that moving forward for a while, if you can, keep that in mind. As soon as you're ready, put your freight into a container and get it moving. Don't wait. The PPE came into play, and we realized we didn't have any. Okay, so we had no supplies of the PPE. So that took up a large amount of the shipping that was at the port. And it was more, they bumped it into air freight. And that took away, as we'll hear a little bit later about what it did to the air freight rates. Okay, the elephant in the room, the air freight. Where do we start? The airports, Logan Airport, Boston, it's closest to us, okay? International flights, almost none. 4 major airports, Chicago O'Hare, JFK, New York, Newark, New Jersey, and Los Angeles, LAX, okay? Most of the international freight, especially out of China, is flying into those airports. At least we had that. That's where I says the supply chain held up. I mean, that could have went, especially in New York, it really surprised us. It surprised us up here in New England that New York and New Jersey were able to take on those flights and also the cargo with what was going on to them, because they were hit pretty hard by the virus. So what happened was, though, and what's happening now is, so all this freight is, because these airports, these, like I said, Boston, Logan, and there's quite a few other ones that have not been up to capacity as far as international flights have gone, is that all this freight is sitting at those airlines, at those cities, and it's got to move, like all the freight from New England is going into New York and New Jersey and now Chicago, so it's got to move by truck. So the warehouses are overloaded, the trucking companies are overworked, they don't, they're understaffed because they also got sick. So air freight, the way it used to be in air freight it is today, you can't put a shipment in China on an airplane and then think it's going to get here the next day, and then hopefully the warehouse will break it down, you clear customs, food and drug, whatever, and then you get it picked up and delivered the next day, which is like 3 days, 3 to 4 days max of the way it used to be. Now you're looking at sometimes 7 to 10 days, 14 days, and a lot of work by your freight forwarder and your customs broker to figure out where that freight is, because there's 3 or 4 different trucking companies or forwarding companies that are handling the freight. That will change when passengers get on these international flights, and these combi airplanes will be able to haul freight into all these different airports. It'll ease up the whole situation. They'll fly in locally. You'll be able to pick up with local trucking companies and deliver to your customers, and the same thing on the export end. So I mean, we're not quite sure when it's all going to come back, and it's all based on when people are able to fly internationally. So that's what we all have to wait for the air freight. Insurance on your freight, because of what I just said. Okay, you've got a lot of freight sitting around different areas of the United States that is far away from where it's supposed to go. This is the same thing on your exports when you ship out. The whole world's in the same situation. Heathrow, London, everything. Think about insuring your freight. Okay, if you didn't think about it before, think about it now. Okay, so you know it's a cost that you didn't have put in before, but you might need it now. Get your forwarder, your broker. If you can't get a door-to-door rate, get a zero deductible. You know, and think about that. If you didn't think about it before, but think about it now, because your transportation, your supply chain is being handled by more than just 3 or 4 different people. Warehouses, okay, it all contracted. So airlines stopped flying, warehouses laid off people, they furloughed people. They're going to come back, but we don't know how they're going to come back. So management is going to be key to all the different warehouses, and let's say the breakdown stations, the container stations across the United States will be how they're going to come back. Are they going to be staffed properly? Are the employees going to be educated? Are they going to know what they're doing? So be prepared for that. You're going to have, in transportation, you're going to have to rely a lot more on your forwarder and your broker. And you know, if you're not happy with what you get, you know, there's a few of them out there. So you can, you know, go, you know, find one that's going to work for you and give you situations where, you know, you have options. You don't want to just get with one that doesn't have any options. We found out through the supply chain that through our company, we use many agents across the world, that was an advantage. So, you know, keep that in mind if, you know, when you're moving forward, because you want to move your freight. Airline rates, okay, they were ridiculous because of the PPE. We actually, as a company, started a whole division just for PPE imports. $25 to $30 a kilo air freight rates 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, where they're usually $3, $4 a kilo. It's crazy. The PPE was flying in, it was, you know, 1,000 kilos, and they're paying $25,000, $30,000 in air freight, but they're still flying it in. Your importers, your exporters, the same thing on your export rates, they were ridiculous, okay? The good news is the last week, and today I saw it again, the rates are coming down. So out of China, we're looking at between $7 and $10 a kilo, which is unbelievable because it was just $20 a kilo 10 days ago. So things are starting to come back. So we're still limited with what kind of flights you have and what kind of space you have, but it's something positive that it's going to come back. Once the airlines are flying into all the different cities, okay, what'll happen is they've all lost money. They've all tried to get bailout money. I don't know where they are with that, but they're going to try to get some of this money back. So the more that people fly and these flights are coming into the United States and leaving, okay, that will create the competition amongst the airlines and that'll keep the rates down. So once we see that, that's what's going to happen. So, you know, it could be a weekly and maybe even, you know, once they start with flights at daily where you have to check on your rates. Rates, we used to quote, our office used to quote, would take, you know, we would quote rates and we could give them, you know, 30 days for the rate, 45 days for the rate. Right now, you know, up until 2 weeks ago, we're giving like 24 hours. So that's how fast these rates change. Trucking, okay. Workforce was hit hard, especially up here in the East Coast, New York. Quite a few drivers were getting sick. And it's difficult to get good drivers because of the different regulations involved with them. We have our own trucking company, and they did an unbelievable job. And they did a lot of special things, okay, and they stayed healthy, knock on wood. So the whole trucking industry is changed, okay. The good thing about the trucking is the fuel's low, because that was one of the other good things that happened during COVID, is that the fuel prices were low. So that saved a lot because they didn't go the other way. So that the fuel came down. Deliveries were tough, and deliveries still are tough, and pickups are tough because a lot of the warehouses aren't fully open. So you had to get timed where people had to come there and open it up and jump on a forklift to get your freight. Some of these drivers coming out of the East Coast warehouses were a little afraid of having to come in and handling the, the paperwork and things like that because of the COVID. Well, it seems like it's all getting straightened out. Everybody has masks. Everybody's protected. They do their hands. They have their space. So the transportation industry, the supply chain, and the transportation end has really figured out the spacing and what's needed. Okay, because it's so important because we have to keep it going. The good thing about trucking is, and the thing is, like anybody has a commute, there's no more traffic. Okay. Here in New England, it's starting to come back a little bit. Next week, it's going to be a little bit more. But trucks were moving out of New York, going to Boston, and getting there in 3 hours, 3.5 hours, where it used to take them 5. So I think the same thing down in Florida that you guys were seeing down in Miami, that you were in traffic. But there, so the good thing during the COVID and up until today was that there was no traffic. So once traffic comes back, you're going to have congestion. And then you're going to have the construction that everyone started early because they had time and space to do it. So keep in mind your deliveries are going to be a little bit slower, okay? And that's going to be for a while. Route your freight, okay? See how they're routing your freight. So like when you go to your agents, okay, and you're having, say, your air freight, your LCL freight, find out where they're going into the United States and make sure you agree with that. And ask them why or where they're going around the world. During COVID, we had shipments coming out of Asia that were going into Russia, and we had shipments going in Australia, Japan, Israel, just trying to get the way here. So they're going boom, 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 boom to get to here, whereas before they used to go straight down. So get a little bit more involved with that as like the routing. That's important moving forward. U.S. Customs was unbelievable. They're so good. I think they're the best in the world. They're right on spot. But they're into compliance. So your export, what happened? We had some shipments that we handled. End user statements were very popular with U.S. Customs asking for that. So make sure that you have those. I would suggest any transactions on exports that you always have an end user statement just on hand, just in case you get called and you need that. That is so important, and you should always have that. China duties, exclusion, confusion on imports. This was set up before COVID. This all compounded, okay? Exclusions, take advantage of that. On your import freight, look to see, make sure your brokers check that you might get some duty back, which is always a good thing and a rare thing. Try to do that. When you do on the import end, when you do you're paying your duties, don't let your customs broker pay the duty. You guys pay your duty. You have your importers, and if you're dealing with the importers, have them pay their duties, and because it's a direct transaction between the person that's responsible for the duty and the government. And your controllers, your accounting people will love it. Actually, in U.S. Customs has automated for when you pay directly. They have a program called PMS that you could pay once a month and you get more time, so you don't have to pay, in 10 days to your broker. Some of the things, this is a worldwide disruption, so it's not just us, okay? So like, you're gonna hear Kim talk about it, and she's gonna tell you some things because she knows she's got a lot of calls about people trying to get out of China and go to other countries, and she's gonna explain all that. So everybody's in the same boat. Everything's contracted. Rotterdam, container, future container loads, they're thinking on 10% reduction for the next 4 or 5 years, each year 10% less freight moving out of Rotterdam, which is one of the biggest ports in the world. U.S. Customs, fiscal year 2019, they started in October. They collected $81 billion in duty. Now, this is 1 year. That's a 73% increase in duty collection, and because of the China duty, the 201 duty with steel and aluminum, the solar panels. That's unbelievable. 73% increase in collection of duties by U.S. Customs. CTPAT, Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism, 11,600 members. Think about it, okay? It's a good thing. We're CTPAT. A few of our big clients are. 54% of the CTPAT members had saved over $70 million in intensive exam charges because they were a part of CTPAT. That's not guaranteed, but it's something to think about, okay? It kind of gives you like a green light. A couple more things and then that'll be it from me. USMCA, that replaces NAFTA, as everyone knows. The forms for that are starting to come out. Okay, they're starting to go online. We will have them in our, we have a webinar with the government soon coming up, and I think in another week, that's going to explain a little bit more. So remember, you've got to change that. There's a new form. You're going to have to keep that online. There's going to be, you'll have a printout on what you actually have to do with that. So that's important. Force majeure, that came into play. Okay, it happened in Katrina and it happened in 9/11. Look into it. Contracts were because of COVID, people were trying to use it to their advantage, and I think some of them did. So keep that in mind. The supply chain and transportation in the South, like I said, it's just been contracted, and it changes daily. So just something to be aware of. Customs brokers, freight forwarders, we were essential. Okay, every state knew that we had to move the freight, trucking companies. So you know, you need good ones. So you know, that's what you need. You need them to be part of your team, and that's one of the things that you should look forward to. If you're not happy, switch. Use a customs broker that knows when to stop and suggest to use a customs attorney. Don't let them make decisions for you. Okay. So you know, keep that in mind that you want to do. To end it, watch your money. Go get business. That's how we're going to beat all of this. We got to get more business. We got to get companies back to work. We need to start selling, buying. Kim and Samantha are going to go over that a little bit to make it easier for you. They're unbelievable speakers. You're going to be you're in for a good show with those two. That's about it. Just before we came on the line, Chris said he asked me if we wanted JF Moran, our company, to host the virtual cocktail hour that's going to happen after this. So since the price was right, I agreed with him, and I said that we would do this. So I'll see you later after the show.
Thanks so much, George, as well as for promoting the social side of webinars, because that's one of the things I think we miss most from having the in-person events is being able to talk to each other afterwards, as well as for giving us a really solid overview of how things are moving in the logistics business and helping people manage expectations with regards to timing, with regards to cost of how it will be to get their product to their customers or from their suppliers. And so speaking of suppliers and the supply chain, our next presenter is going to be Kim Kirkendall. So I'll turn it over to you.
Hello, everyone. I almost said good morning. I'm not quite sure what time of day it is. So it's afternoon, though, I think. We're out of morning. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, George. I'm going to start my presentation here. You should be able to see it. If you guys have any trouble, unmute yourself, Chris, and give me a shout. So we're going to talk about Asian supply chain, primarily about China, since that's the gorilla in the room, and that's where a lot of people are already manufacturing. We're going to talk a bit about travel and work restrictions, and then supply chain problems, and then what can you do to secure your supply chain. So this is the topic for this afternoon. Travel and work restrictions, this may not be news to anyone, but China has gone through various waves of restricting movement into the country, as has Vietnam and Thailand and Indonesia, Japan, Korea, a lot of the other countries in the region. So it was at first a quarantine, and then it still is and has been a suspension of all current visa holders. Even if you're a resident in China with a residence permit, your permit is suspended. You have to apply for a temporary visa and justify why you specifically need to go into the country right now, and have someone in China who verifies that the need is there, that it's important for you to be there. And this has caught up companies that are trying to commission new equipment or perform research and development. So it's caught a lot of companies unprepared. I also know people that are full-time living in China and have been for 15 years who were caught in Ireland or Brazil or somewhere else, and even they can't get back into the country right now. And then if you do get back into China, and normally your business would involve you traveling around Asia, it's equally difficult to leave and then come back. And should you get this temporary visa, you also still have a mandatory 14-day quarantine in a government facility, which is typically a 4 or 5-star hotel of their choosing. And that is at your expense. And from my contacts, I understand that it's been running about $1,000, $1,500 for food and lodging for those 14 days. Should you feel like you need a 14-day quarantine vacation in a hotel of the Chinese government's choice, then you're welcome to go for that. So this is something that we're really keeping an eye on. If you follow me on LinkedIn, I share and post updates on this and a lot of other topics. So that's, the fact that we can't travel. Vietnam has also had mandatory quarantines and travel. That's another country a lot of people are in. Thailand, restricting travel. So you need to watch on an ongoing basis. What's the situation? How does it look? What's happening before you make your plans? And you run the risk that you're in country when there's another surge of cases, if that were to be happening, and you may not be able to come back, or you may not be able to stay. So it's just an increased level of risk that I expect to continue through June, potentially July, and then on and off maybe over the winter, who knows. So supplier management, one of the bigger issues is, are companies back to work? Typically, mid and large size companies across the Asian region are back to work. Some of the very large companies, auto manufacturers, were reporting a week and 2 weeks ago in China, in Thailand and Vietnam that they're back in. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's their normal workforce. They may have had to pull from a less desirable pool of candidates because they typically have workers that went home for the Lunar New Year holiday and weren't able to come back, or couldn't leave or move, or were in an area that was really on lockdown. So they hired temporary workers, which the Chinese government made easier to do because it's not easy normally to hire someone and terminate someone in China. So they may not be as well trained. They may not be people that intend to stay for the rest of the year, or they might have been there in April and now their normal workforce came back in May or June. And so they're still getting acclimated to whatever products are in the production line. So this is true. These are issues that I'm going to talk a lot about on the export from Asia to the US side, but it's equally true if you're selling into Asia, that your customers are in this situation. So in addition to workforce issues, people also have cash flow issues. They've lost revenue, but their overhead has continued. So your partner's financial health is of greater concern now. It should always be a concern of yours, whether they're a manufacturer or a customer, or your own business or supplier in China. But it's especially concerning now because Chinese banks give asset-based lending, not operating capital loans. Vietnamese banks are the same way. Some of the other countries in the region, Thailand, Malaysia, it's a little bit easier to get operating capital loans. But consequently, cash flow is always a major problem for a lot of these customers and manufacturers. So with the stress on business and revenue and supplier payments, it can be an even bigger issue now. What other stressors were there before? Is there an aging owner? Did the trade war disrupt sales in China specifically? Did it increase sales for your customers or suppliers in other parts of Asia? Which also is, an increase of sales can destroy your business and cash flow as majorly as a loss of sales or business can. So just because their business is booming does not necessarily mean that that makes them a stronger company. Were there poor management issues before? All of those things could be worse now. A lot of the governments in Asia are offering recovery packages similar to what the US is doing. Are your partners taking advantage of that? These are all things you need to know, right? In terms of assessing your risk in this situation. And I'm going to say this a couple times, but you want to be a good partner. You want to be a good employer. If you own the facility overseas, you want to be a good customer, be kind, be patient, be clear, Americans don't tend to communicate in as much detail as a lot of Asian country business norms are expecting. You need to be very firm and you need to be prepared. If you lose a particular supplier, do you have a plan B? Have you been dual sourcing? If you're not, this is a good time to start possibly spreading your risk, whether that's across Asia or through North America or however it works out. Other supply chain problems, George spoke about these, so I'm not going to go into them in great detail. But Asian and US customs have been on heightened alert for the last 6 weeks, 2 months, a lot because of PPE. And so it slowed down customs. Vietnam was afraid that during the trade war that Chinese companies were shipping product to Vietnam, doing a minimal amount of work, if any, to qualify to change the country of origin and then shipping out of Vietnam. So Vietnamese customs was really inspecting goods to make sure that wasn't happening. Chinese customs have been cutting down on PPE and other types of fraud that are going on, which just slows everything down. With the slowdown in vessels and planes, it disrupts the normal workflow at ports, again, as George said. And then, so they have peak workflow and then they lay everyone off because it's slow and then they have peaks again. You have sickness issues, workers not showing up, social distancing, new rules about how people are handling equipment and working, more people working from home. All of those are disruptive, in this situation. So you need to be very creative and think outside the box of how you're going to move goods and move product and what your expectations for delivery and timing are for customs and logistics. Supplier management, what's their return to work status? These are things you want to be aware of. You should hopefully know. If not, you need to find out what is their raw material situation. Who are their suppliers? Are they domestic in the country that your manufacturer, your customers in? Are they outside of the countries? Is that impacting their ability to do business with you? What kind of financial terms are they on with their suppliers? Are their suppliers even operational? These are all business risk issues. How is their cash flow? It's more critical than you know. How are people communicating and staying on task? There may be disruption within their business of how well they're able to stay focused. So, and then how are you giving them clear priorities and direction? Many times when I'm working with companies and they're saying, we're not getting the answers we need from our suppliers, I go back through their communication and, the Americans will say things about, I want this information and that information and this shipment and that shipment. If you're not giving them clear priorities about what are the most critical parts, what are the most critical shipments and orders, can they part ship, can they air freight some and ocean the other, then they're going to have to make those decisions. And they're going to make those decisions on what they intuit your priorities to be, rather than you being the one to say, these are my priorities and this is what I want you to do. George mentioned briefly force majeure. It's been an issue with some companies. Both American companies are looking at force majeure as a way to cancel contracts that they can't perform on, whether that's purchase or sell. Chinese and Asian companies have been looking at force majeure. Force majeure is a 1-hour conversation in and of itself about how it's applied from an international law standpoint, how it's applied in each country, legally what they consider to be a purpose of force majeure or good enough justification to apply force majeure. If you have not already, it's again a very important time to look at what contracts do you have with your customers, with your distributors, with your contracts. Are they necessary in your situation? This whole area is something that I recommend that you have, someone tasked with taking a step back and really looking at right now. Let's say you want to look at an alternative supplier. You want to find alternative suppliers in the country that you're dealing with now. You want to go to another country. You maybe want to renegotiate with your supplier. It's a double-edged sword. It's a good time in the sense that everyone is looking for business opportunities. Business has been disrupted. It's also a bad time because you can't travel, so it's difficult to qualify a customer, a supplier, a partner, to check in quality inspections, to work through problems on new product development. If it's a new supplier and a product that they haven't made before, it's of your design. So it's not an easy thing to do ever, and this may not be the time for you to start doing that until things stabilize a little bit. So, get to the truth. I call it, people will call me, they'll call me and say, my supplier cheated me, or my customer lied to me, or this happened. And, a big part of that in many cases is what I call, a lot of it's communication and cultural issues, but a big part of it is what I call aspirational lying. And we all do aspirational lying. Americans don't tend to do it in business as frequently because we fear litigation. We have a very litigious society. Other countries that are not as litigious as we are tend to do aspirational lying in business. We tend to do it in our personal lives. So aspirational lying is telling someone what you hope is going to be true. So if someone calls you in your personal life, if someone calls you and says, are you going to be ready in 2 months for us to go on vacation together or to take this new job? Will you have passed the big exam you need, licensing exam? You may say, oh yeah, I'm going to do it. Now you don't know that, right? But you're hoping you're going to do it. That's your intention. And you see that a lot more in business in Asia than you do in the US again. So you'll ask a supplier or customer, do you have the money? Are you going to be able to ship it, on January 15th, our due date? Can you get these raw materials? And a lot of times they'll say, yes, I can. We've got this. And what that means is, I hope that we can, and I think that we can, and we're working towards it. But it doesn't have the same yes weight that statement has in the US, where we're much more cognizant of under-promising and over-delivering, again, because of litigation. So how do you verify information? As much as possible, you want to use objective measures. So can you validate with let's say your supplier, or let's say a customer, I'm shipping a large piece of equipment to this customer and I need to send someone over, I need to talk them through hooking the equipment up, and I don't want to waste my time and my money if they don't have the plant ready or if the equipment's not unboxed and in place. And if you ask them directly, is it ready? They're going to probably say yes, because they think by the time you get here, it will be ready. And so the best way to ask is to say an indirect question. Can you take a photo of the equipment? I want to see what the electrical system looks like and how it's plugged into the wall. And I want to see if I need to send you another cable different than what I've sent you before. So can you send me a couple photos? Now, in a non-threatening way, I'm getting some information that I need. So it may be asking for material certifications for the product, and you can see when they're dated and when the raw materials came in. So again, you need to be creative here. Like I said before, finding an alternative supplier, moving into another country or region right now is complicated. For all of the same reasons, it's complicated to manage a customer or supplier that you actually have a relationship with. So you need to do even more of these steps, more objective measures, more investigation. So you can ask for incremental indirect data. So rather than waiting until the shipment's ready to go 2 months in advance, when I know that they should be receiving raw materials, then I say, can I see your material certifications or orders? Can I see your inventory levels? Because I've got a couple orders and I want to see how much you have in stock of these particular components before I take the orders. And they may send you their entire inventory list, raw material inventory list, and then you know if they're ready for the orders they already have. So you want to trust and verify. And then as much as possible, have some third-party outside auditors, to go in and confirm if you need to. So one other thing I always encourage people to look at right now is operations procedures, yours and theirs, but mostly yours, because you can't change theirs, unless it's your own facility. So most US companies have grown over 30 years or 50 years or 70 years from a mom and pop business to a bigger organization. You've probably acquired other companies, you've sold divisions, you have people in the organizations that have been doing that job for 20 years or 30 years or longer. It's extremely unlikely, I hardly ever see US companies that have information about their product, about their production, about their quality, written to the extent that it should be, because you have all these people with tribal knowledge. So, but if it's not written down effectively, then you're not communicating that effectively to your partners in China, because what they're looking at is what they have in writing. They're not processing what you're saying verbally, whether you're standing there or on the phone, as well and effectively as they're going to what you provide in writing. And what you provide in writing is extremely weak in 98% of the circumstances. So this, again, another great time to go through those documents and see, what do you have, what are you communicating, specification sheets, engineering drawings. A lot of companies have engineering drawings and don't also have spec sheets for those same products. Approval matrices, how I've in bottom, authorization matrices, documents that need to be signed. The step of signing something is very motivating to someone, that they're taking personal responsibility for this. And so it's having those signed documents in place can enact more comfort and quality control on every aspect of the business. There's something I call the Superman syndrome. Superman syndrome is that, a colleague or employee or owner that flies over to the customer or the factory in Asia and, gets it done, right? So when we have a problem, we fly Superman over. And Superman generally likes to go because when you're Superman, you're taller, richer, and better looking, right? You come home and you're just Clark Kent, you're not fabulous anymore. So Superman doesn't even mind going. And so built into a lot of our supply chain systems are Superman, that something goes wrong and we don't dig into why it's gone wrong. We don't write better operations procedures. We don't train people better. We don't create better control documents. We just fly Superman over. And now with these travel restrictions, you can't. So, that's really exposing a lot of weaknesses in our systems. And I again encourage you to do a real fix, not a patch. It could be documents, could be process, could be you have the wrong people in place or they need to be better trained. So I encourage you, again, written procedures, review your authorization matrices, sign documents, checks and balances, internally yourself as well as between yourself and your partner. A lot of the consulting projects I get are complicated by the fact that the company wants to restructure their organization in China and terminate a couple people and move them around. And when I start asking, where are the employment contracts? Where are your HR manuals? How are you, how is it set up? They don't have any of that. They may have it in China, but they don't have it in the United States. So, it's really a good time to do these internal audit looks. Summary, your to-do list. Increase your inspection criterion. More frequent, higher AQLs, more random audits. Use indirect information gathering and verify everything. Have your partners verified and qualified. And if you don't have any staff in Asia, reach out to those that have people on the ground and utilize them. We have resources in China. I have teams in China that we can go in and check things for you, represent you, customers, suppliers, whatever it is. And again, you want to be a good partner, but not a schmuck, right? You want to extend the financing if they're having financial difficulties. You want to allow them time to recover if their business is down, if they're slammed with orders. You know, you want to be a good partner, but you also want to verify. So trust and verify. And above all, don't get into the mask business, please. I can't tell you how many people I've had for a long time. It was almost every day. People in China saying, you know, who are doctors and lawyers and economists saying, oh, I've got these great masks for sale, you know, and then people in the US who are financial planners and, you know, selling tchotchke decorative items that suddenly want to import masks into the United States. If it's not your business, it's not a good time to start now, right? You need to be doing what you need to be doing yourself. So thank you very much, everyone. Any Q&A at the end, please let me know. And I'm looking forward to the drinks that George sent me for the happy hour. On to you, Samantha.
Thanks so much, Kim. Thanks so much, Kim. That was really informative to hear about how to manage your supply chain. And I really like the concept of aspirational lying. It's a really creative way of putting it. And it's something that we're all guilty of, but it can have an impact on our businesses when we do try and tell people or make commitments that are based on the best of intentions, but are not certain. However, one thing I am certain about is that IBT Online can really help quite a bit with how to use the new e-commerce tools. I've been very happy to have Samantha come and make presentations when we were doing them live to talk about e-commerce. I've sat in on numerous of her webinars that IBT Online does, and they're really a terrific partner with Enterprise Florida and can do a lot for your business to start taking advantage of some of the e-commerce opportunities by localizing your website and optimizing it. But I'll let Samantha get into that and tell us a little bit about e-commerce. Thanks very much, Samantha.
All right, thank you. So I am going to share my screen. Give me 1 second. Here we go. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us here. I really appreciate it, and I hope all this information, I know it's a lot, but I hope you find it very useful to make your supply chain more resilient. So today we're going to go through a bit of a journey together. First, we're going to talk about the buyer and their journey, which is absolutely key to understand before jumping into the e-commerce platforms and different options. Then we're going to go into global e-commerce landscape, international e-commerce choices for exporters, and then just action points, helpful resources, takeaways, and then Chris will handle the Q&A. So first is the buyer and their journey. So as HubSpot themselves define it, a buyer persona is a semi-fictional representation of your ideal customer based on market research and real data about your existing customers. So defining a buyer persona is really, really important because it allows you to make sure that you're always targeting the right person at the right time with the right message, saving yourself and your company a ton of time and resources. So this is a phenomenal example of a buyer persona in the US. Zipcart is a company that actually has their buyer persona embedded into their mission statement. So somebody who is urban, educated, tech savvy, and environmentally conscious. And you can see by their Instagram posts that it is completely on point. These are two people. They look a bit like younger, like millennials, and then they're holding plants, so they look like they care about the environment. And if you look at their backgrounds, it's obviously an urban environment, and it's not like they're on a farm or anything. And the good news for you is that it shouldn't be hard to do. You already know who your customers are. You already know the main attributes of these customers. And then it's just a matter of getting your sales team and your marketing team together and just chat about who your typical buyer persona is. But what's important to keep in mind is that you can, and you absolutely should, have a few different buyer personas. it's especially true for international buyer personas because they're most likely going to be speaking a different language. They might have a different lifestyle, maybe a different age group, and maybe they might even have different buyer habits. A really good example of international buyer personas is L'Oreal. But before I dive into the case study, especially in the times that we're in today, the international buyer personas can differ from your domestic ones. So on this slide, there are a few questions that you should ask yourself, like, are there multiple buyer personas for my export markets? How do they typically find me? What do they care about? So now taking a look at L'Oreal, we're using them because they're cited pretty frequently for how spot on their international marketing is. So if you take a look at this picture and the text below it, you can see that L'Oreal is assuring their US stylists that they're committed to support them while we're socially distancing ourselves. L'Oreal knows that their buyer persona is, in the US, are most likely stylists that are either small business owners or work for a small business. And right now, the majority of stylists are closed because of social distancing. So L'Oreal's support and its messaging is reflective of what they understand is important to the US market right now, which is support for SMEs. But then if you take a look at L'Oreal Australia, the message is completely different. There is no mention of COVID-19, coronavirus, social distancing, none of that. Instead, there's a focus on the climate. And this is most likely due to the absolutely horrible fires that they suffered in the beginning of the year. So that is what matters to that specific buyer persona right now, and their messaging is reflective of that. And then the last example is L'Oreal Brazil. And they're demonstrating to their Brazilian consumers that they're doing their part to help the Brazilian people in this difficult time by producing hand sanitizer, which is something that they actually don't typically produce. So each buyer persona is clearly different, and L'Oreal's messaging is respectful of that. So what are your buyer persona's priorities today? And this is one of the rare cases that most companies are kind of going through the same thing, where they are looking after their employees, they're managing costs, they're maintaining supply chains and existing partnerships. And then the fourth and final one, which is the one that I'll be focusing on in my presentation, is to generate the sales, exports, and business. So just to try to keep everything up and running. And the key to this right now is online. And this is great because the world is online. As of January 2020, more than 4.5 billion people across the world are on the internet, which is about 60% of the world's population. And the average amount of time spent on the internet is actually nearly 7 hours a day, and that's just an average. I'm trying to find stats for how much that's increased since COVID-19, and it's kind of hard to find hard numbers, but the indication is that the average is topping at around 8.5 hours a day. So if there's one takeaway from the slide is that across the globe, your customers, your prospects, your leads, future distributors, maybe even future employees, your suppliers, everyone your business interacts with is online, and it's growing. If you take a look at these numbers, unique mobile phone users increased by 124 million people. Internet users grew by almost 300 million people, which is the United States pretty much. And not only that, but there are more and more active social media users. And this is just going to continue to grow as the internet and social media becomes more accessible. And on the internet, the main thing that people are doing are communicating. Again, COVID-19 has massively increased communication. Remote working has affected the way people and businesses communicate with each other. And just as an example, there was actually an article that came out on the Financial Times saying that more and more people are posting stuff on LinkedIn, for example. They are posting so that they can stay kind of top of mind and kind of stay on people's minds so that when people do get back to business, they will still remember the company that they were interacting with. And the numbers absolutely back it up. LinkedIn shared that the number of conversations between its members jumped 55% in March from the same month last year. and live broadcasts have gone into absolute overdrive. Demand has more than tripled since February, and users are much more chatty on these live broadcasts. The number of comments on the broadcast has actually surged 272%. So people are loving the communication. So just as a quick takeaway slide from this section, the world is online, so take advantage of it so that you can prepare for the rebound by using effective business development tools. And this absolutely includes e-commerce platforms, but we are also going to review a localized e-commerce platform that will help you be found, be understood, and be easier to do business with. So to start taking a look at the global e-commerce landscape, the first thing to understand is that the global e-commerce is absolutely huge, $3.5 trillion in 2019, and that's in B2C alone. And out of a total world population of about 7.5 billion, 4.5 billion people are online, and 3.4 billion people are shopping online, which means about 45% of the world's population is buying things online. And I mean, we already know that the United States is huge in terms of e-commerce numbers. And it's no surprise that China is also a powerhouse, actually going China first and then the US. But Europe is also huge. And if you take the region as a whole, it's about the same size as the United States. And then here's a snapshot of e-commerce adoption worldwide. With an average of about 74% of internet users saying that they bought something online within the past month. And what I find interesting about this graph is that there are a ton of countries here that have a greater penetration of e-commerce than the United States, who aren't in the top 10 of BDC global e-commerce in terms of numbers, like Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, Poland, Ireland. E-commerce is being adopted worldwide, and it's not just in the main markets, and it's actually projected to grow even more. So here's some interesting statistics and projected growth in e-commerce participation by country in a longer term span. So between 2018 and 2023 in billions of dollars. Just the size, the scope, the scale of global e-commerce and opportunity for your product is absolutely enormous. And it's important to take a look at the percentage of growth, even though some of these are mature markets like the US or Canada or the United Kingdom. So if any of these countries are countries that you're kind of keeping an eye on to grow your e-commerce market in, that's probably a good sign. And now I just want to take a quick look at the different e-commerce activities and habits online. So you'll see that 80% of internet users have gone looking or searching for something to buy, which is why SEO is critical, which I'll get into in a second. And 52% of them have made a purchase on a mobile device, which is why having an e-commerce site that is mobile friendly is also really, really important. And this is why a local user experience on your site and storefront has to be a priority, no matter what platform you decide to use. And it's absolutely worth noting that B2B e-commerce is just as important, if not more important, than B2C e-commerce. Many people think e-commerce as just selling to individual consumers at their kitchen table or before they go to sleep, but there's a huge the prevalence of B2B e-commerce is absolutely huge. It's challenging to get consistent data, but by all measurements, it's huge. At the end of 2018, Statista estimated global B2B e-commerce to be valued at around $10.6 trillion in 2019, which is about 3.5 times the size of the B2C market. But remember, as I mentioned earlier, the people that you're talking to in B2B commerce is the same as the people that you talk to in B2C. And every business, there's a person that's making decisions, that's researching, that are the people that are taking a look at your competitors. The way that they shop for themselves is usually pretty similar to the way that they shop for their businesses. And it's backed up by the numbers. 94% of B2B purchases are researched online before contacting a sales rep or distributor. And 74% of B2B buyers purchase more than 50% of their things online. So what this means is that even if your B2B product or service is a really high price point, or it's very customized and you have to take a kind of consultative sales approach, your website has to be compelling enough to encourage that call to action and convince the customer to request contact, because he or she has already done the research. They've already taken a look at your competitors. They've already have taken a look at any what are those called? Success stories or case studies. So they're doing their research before talking to you. And now we're going to get into the meat of the presentation, which is international e-commerce options for exporters. So when you're thinking about international e-commerce, it's important to keep in mind that you should absolutely have a localized presence, because your US website is a phenomenal resource for your US customers. But if you're looking to attract people in France or in Brazil, for example, you are going to need a localized presence for those two markets. And then you can have SEO and social media to drive traffic to those localized websites. And those localized websites can absolutely lead back to your main corporate US website. And the reason for this is because of search engines. So this is a really great example of how search engines work. There are about 192 different Googles in the world, and that's not even mentioning the other search engines like Baidu and Yandex. So depending on where you're going and where your buyer personas are, they use different search engines. So this is a really great example. I did a search of squeakless dog toys, and my colleague in London in the UK did a squeakless dog toys search on google.co.uk. And as you can see, we got results that were relevant to where we are located. So I got things like Chewy and Amazon and Freedom No Pull Harness. And meanwhile, she got things like Time for Pause, Amazon.co.uk. She got petforums.co.uk, things that were absolutely not relevant to me. And this is the same thing that goes for your product. So even if you're selling something, some sort of widget for manufacturers, the people in those specific countries are going to be using keywords in their local language on their local search engine. And the search engine will pull up websites that they think are relevant to them. And this is also shown by individual keywords. So it's really important when you're creating these localized online presence to do your keyword research, both, and also in the US is also very important. But for example, if you're trying to reach people in Brazil versus people in Portugal, both people speak Portuguese, but if you take a deeper look into the keywords, in this example, we've taken a look at train. The people of Brazil use the word trem versus the people in Portugal use comboio. So if in your translation you're using trem, but you're actually trying to reach Portugal, only 2% of the people that use that search for the word train are using the word trem versus comboio. So even though it's the same language within the same search engine, you need to understand what keywords your specific buyer persona are using. So now taking a look at options for e-commerce. So our suggestion is to have your localized website so that search engines can find you, and once people get on your website, they can understand you, and it's a lot easier to do business with you. But then if you want to incorporate that e-commerce piece, there are 4 options. So the first is a generalist marketplace. Then you have specialist marketplaces and in-market distributors. Then there's your own e-commerce platform, or a combination of the marketplace and your own. So what's important to keep in mind before I dive into each individual one is to understand who your international buyer persona is and how do they feel comfortable purchasing from you. Is it through a generalist marketplace, or do they feel more comfortable on your specific e-commerce platform? So you should take a look at that data and that research before putting all your eggs in one basket and investing in one of these options. So first, let's take a look at generalist marketplaces. So for generalist marketplaces, you have to do a little bit of research to see which platform your buyer persona prefers. So there's the 3 e-commerce giants, which are Amazon, Alibaba, and Rakuten. But please keep in mind that they are built on different business models. So you have to make sure to do your research before committing to a specific generalist marketplace. There are also some really important local players like Zalando in Germany or Mercado Libre in Latin America. And for example, Mercado Libre is actually so important in the Latin American region that Amazon hasn't even really bothered to enter that region. So that's a really good example. If you are looking to sell into Argentina or Chile or Colombia, you want to make sure that you're on Mercado Libre if you're going to choose the generalist marketplace route. So some advantages of the generalist are that it can be a solution to some of the specifics like payments and shipping, but it's really important to keep in mind of the true cost of doing business on any of these platforms that you use, because they obviously do have, depending on their business model, they do have fees that you have to pay. Another disadvantage of generalist marketplaces is that you don't really have control as to what page you land on, depending on your search terms. So you're kind of battling against, especially if you're if you're selling a product that's really highly competitive, you might be displayed right under your main competitor. So that's important to keep in mind in a generalist marketplace as well. So next is specialist marketplaces and in-market distributors. This is really common and probably the most common choice actually for B2B companies, because it lets your distributor do the work. Distributor sites can either be general distributors like Lowe's or B&Q for the UK, or Elf International that distributes branded consumer electronics. So kind of like a generalist retailer, or they can be industry specific like Rexel for electronics or Partspace for aviation. And many companies opt for distributor websites when they start out trading internationally, and I can totally see why. This distributor takes care of the marketing and the inventory, and it's a great solution if you are starting in a new market and have a great relationship with your distributor. But there are some cons too, because you're essentially opening yourself up to competition. And distribution platforms can carry the risk of them taking ownership of your brand in a way that you might not agree with. So we've had companies come to us and say, listen, we love our distributor, they do a great job selling, but they misuse our logos, or they don't use the right colors, or they advertise our product right next to one of our competitors, or maybe they might be misrepresenting some of their products, or they use the wrong description. The list goes on and on. So the bottom line is that specialist marketplaces and in-market distributors are great, especially if you're starting out. But if you want to have control of your branding, of your messaging, of the way that your websites, the way that your products are displayed, a way to solve those problems is by having a localized presence along with your distributor site. And there's ways that you can kind of connect both to the point where your localized website is a sales and marketing tool for your distributor, and it can actually be kind of like a selling point for new distributors to start distributing your product. So the third option is creating your own global e-commerce platform. And this comes with its own pros, like you have complete control over your marketing, your branding, and your messaging, but it also comes with some challenges. It can be a little overwhelming, especially if you don't have a good in-house e-commerce person or expert, or if you don't have a trusted company outhouse to do it for you. But if you do decide to go this route, there is a wealth of platforms to choose from, and different businesses have different needs, but there's a few things that are absolutely clear that are non-negotiables, and those you can see on the left. So it has to be a mobile responsive design, meaning when somebody pulls it up on a cell phone or on a huge desktop, everything looks fit to screen and nothing looks wonky. And that's especially important for very mobile-friendly markets like China and Latin America. And you want a simple user interface, so really pleasant user experience. And I mean, the list goes on. Automation, reporting. These are all things that you want to keep in mind when choosing a specific platform. And then the fourth option, and the option that we recommend if and when you have the capacity to manage it, is a multi-channel or multi-platform strategy. This leverages the advantage of the three options, so the generalist marketplace, the specialist marketplace or distributor, and your own e-commerce platform. So it's omni-channel. It gives you visibility where your clients are. It can generate more sales and faster growth. It provides maximum brand development because you can have a level of control since you have your own e-commerce platform and your own localized platform. And it enables optimal management and more valuable market information. So this is the combination of the above is the way to go if you have the capacity to do it. So in summary, in addition to localized websites so that your potential customers can find you in those markets, you can choose one generalist, distributor, your own e-commerce platform. But regardless of what you choose, there are a ton of benefits of having one of those options with a localized website. So because having a localized website will help you develop that brand awareness, it can help you control your own marketing, your own branding. You can differentiate your product. You can actually interact with and understand who your customer is, which is something that you don't really get from selling just via a distributor or just a general marketplace. So it just gives you more control overall over your business internationally. But you also have to, regardless of what tool you end up using, so what platform you end up using, you can have your e-commerce enabled localized website, but you also have to have international online marketing to drive traffic to whatever platform you're using. And I'm just going to briefly touch upon this because it is, I mean, you see it in social media, in Instagram and Facebook. They're making it easier and easier for you to purchase things via social media or even your search engine. Like Google has that Google Shopping now. So international online marketing absolutely goes hand in hand with your e-commerce website. And just a few best practices. So first, you have to identify your buyer persona, which is what we spoke about in the beginning of this presentation. The second piece is understanding your buyer's journey. So how do they get to the point of deciding to purchase your product? How do they find you? How do they go through that awareness phase, that consideration phase, and then that decision phase? You also want to set your objectives. So based on your buyer's journey and your buyer persona, you might have different objectives for different markets. So maybe since you're entering a new market, for example, your main priority is brand awareness and gaining that trust and credibility in that market. So you want to make sure that your objectives are set so you actually understand how to determine whether your social media marketing and search engine marketing was a success. And lastly, you need to campaign. You need to map out your campaign. So the more you plan, the better, because if you just say, okay, I'm going to start posting on social media, and you're posting once, maybe you post twice this week, and then none for the next 2 weeks, and then your campaign, and really follow through with it. And this is just a really good example as to why it's so important to understand who your buyer persona is and how they interact with you and with businesses in general. So this is a great example of how a different buyer persona interacted with a recent social media post on Facebook in this example. So for this campaign, we were promoting the same product with similar imagery and similar messaging, although of course each one was localized, one for Indonesia and one for Germany. So if we take a look at the results for this specific post, For Germany, over 1,200 engagements, which we were actually really, really pleased about, because Germany is a bit more reserved than a place like Indonesia, which had 20,450 engagements, which is amazing. I mean, and they weren't just likes or a little comment, but they were loves and shares and long comments. So we were really proud of how this went. And if we stopped right here, if we stopped our analysis right there, we would infer that our campaign in Indonesia was much more successful than our campaign in Germany, but that's not actually the case. So if we look at the full buyer's journey, here we get a much better picture. So you need to know each market specifically and how they react, so that when you look at the numbers, you can really understand them. So for Indonesia, for example, we know that the market engages really easily. So they're incredibly reactive and responsive, unlike the more reserved Germans. But if you take a look at the actual conversions, so that's the piece that's really important for this specific company, that indicates that the same amount of people, or roughly the same amount of people, bought their product or asked for a quote. So we know from experience that you need to get those levels of engagement from a place like Indonesia to get the same amount of conversion from a place like Germany. So less engagement doesn't necessarily mean lower sales. So each market is specific, and you need to take into account those market specifics. So now just kind of finishing this up, action points, helpful sources, and takeaways. So success through e-commerce means localization. You can't really get around it. You have to choose the right e-commerce model. So whether that's the generalist or the distributor or your own, but you have to use localized websites and localized online marketing to be found, be understood, and be trusted with, so that they can actually do business with you. And then lastly, you need to know and understand your buyer persona and your buyer's journey, as we just saw. So for your e-commerce websites, as of right now, you need to say that you are open for business. And this isn't just for e-commerce, this is for just in general in the US, internationally. You need to let your customers know, your potential customers know, how they can do business with you right now, and if it's changed in any sort of way. So make sure to review your SEO and your keywords, see if they've been affected by what's going on. Maybe you need to include new calls to action on your websites. Maybe you have new resources that can help them at this time. Or maybe it's just something as simple as putting a banner up and saying, hey, yes, we're open for business, but it might take a little longer to get our product to you. So just to set those expectations in the beginning before they actually start purchasing your products. And then in terms of marketing, these are our little takeaways for marketing. So make sure to really understand your buyer persona, really understand your buyer's journey. Don't disappear from the radar. So make sure to continue posting, continue providing really valuable information to your potential customers, and continually review your search engine keywords and your search engine marketing. Because once that's gone, it's gone. I mean, it's really, really hard to get back. And just one last note, so we have a program with Enterprise Florida where they have an $8,000 grant available to companies who are interested in e-commerce or just a localized web presence for their international markets. And there's a ton of resources and information on my website. But this program is available, and there is that grant money for eligible companies. So if you have any questions or anything, don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, all yours.
Hey, well, thanks very much, Samantha. And you got quite a cute little puppy there.
Oh, thanks.
Now, I want to give people the opportunity to put some questions to our speakers. So if you want to enter a question in using the chat feature, for those of you who might not be familiar, for me, at least, it's at the bottom of the screen, right in the middle. When you go over that, you'll see there's a number of different options, and chat with a little message box is one of them. Already getting some great praise from our friend Diane Sears at I4 Business Magazine, thanking all three presenters for doing a great presentation. Maybe just to start things off, I'll throw a question out there to Kim about how can a U.S. company get to know their whole supply chain and not just the factory or the distributor that they buy from?
In normal times, I would say visit your supplier and spend some quality time talking about their business and showing interest in their business and understanding how they're buying raw materials and if there's anything you can do to help them, because it's very common in China that the relationship is so important in this situation, and so you're being interested is part of your showing that you care about the relationship. It's not seen as being intrusive necessarily. And you can, as you go through, Chinese business owners, small factory owners and businesses that are independently owned, so outside of Western-owned suppliers in China, I find that when I'm talking with them, I can ask who their suppliers are, who their other customers are, and they're very open about sharing information. They don't try to hide it. In a position now where you can't travel there, if you have someone in China who can do that for you, perfect, because it's better done face-to-face. If you can't travel there, if you have a great relationship with them, you can still ask those questions. If you don't have a really strong relationship, then you need to use, again, what I call that indirect information gathering. So you would say, our customer expects us to be able to give them a matrix of where the raw materials and the components that go into our products are sourced from. So we just like to understand, what part of the country they're coming from or what other regions. So if you could give us X, Y, and Z information about those sub-suppliers or the rest of the business, and very frequently they will share that information with you. If you run into roadblocks with that, then again, it's being in person, going through the plant. You can often take photos of in their warehouse, so you can take photos of markings on the side of cartons. You can often take photos of documents in the inventory control section or space in the factory that have suppliers' names on them. So there's a variety of different ways, but as compared to the US, it's typically much easier to ask and get that information, especially if you have a good relationship to start with.
Thanks, Kim. And Diane actually has a question. I think that would probably be best directed to Samantha, about whether you're seeing platforms like Zoom being embraced by supply chain partners in other countries right now, and what are the pluses and minuses of using these?
Yes, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. To be honest, I'm not sure. I would imagine that they are using Zoom. I know chat on things like it's coming up as WeChat, but it's not WhatsApp. WhatsApp has increased tremendously. So, and that's obviously a really easy platform to chat with your international partners and distributors. So I know that has increased tremendously, but I can't speak to Zoom specifically.
Are platforms like WhatsApp secure insofar as you don't have to be concerned about sharing information on there, because you might have somebody hacking the information, and so if they're able to see what it is that you're saying and sell that information to a competitor, is that a concern, or can people use it as freely as they use the phone?
WhatsApp is actually one of the more secure chat rooms that you could use.
I have another question. This one for
WeChat,
George.
that would be a different answer.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, not to be confused with WeChat.
Yeah, I guess anything you want to share with the Chinese government, go ahead and use that. But otherwise,
Only if they would be interested
not one of the
in
better
you.
ones.
If there's no reason
Yeah.
to be interested in you, then you don't have to worry.
That must be my aspirational lying, that somebody would be that interested in what I have to say. I've got a question for George that came to me. Do you anticipate importing from China to continue at the pre-COVID-19 levels, or will companies source from other countries?
Well, Kim and I had a conversation about this a week ago, and it's not going to be easy to move from China to source. They're 3, 4, 5 years out to go to other countries in Asia, or like just to find another manufacturer in another country. So it will stay probably the same way. The levels are going to be a lot smaller just because of the business atmosphere shrinking. But I don't see it change it for 3 or 4 years. But I think my own feeling is that yes, it will change though. Kim, do you want to add in on that too?
Yeah, I think the challenge is, I mean, it's been 10 years already that people have come to me and said, if we want to move out of China or we want to dual source out of China, where do we go? And the challenge is that, Vietnam is the size of California to China, the way that California is to the US. So you couldn't move everything to Vietnam any more than you could move everything in the United States to California. And Vietnam is a communist country that represses social rights and freedom of the press. And it's equally difficult to set up a company in Vietnam. It's difficult to bring your revenue back from Vietnam to get the money out of the country. Bribery is still a major issue in Vietnam, much more than it is in China right now. It's like they call Vietnam the China of 30 years ago. Thailand is being run by, and I won't say this in writing because I don't want to be deterred from ever going back to Thailand, but Thailand has been run by the military for 3 or 4 years now, and there have been no protests because they've jailed the protesters. So Thailand for foreigners in general is safe if you stay out of the political discussion. So it's not easy, and then you have the infrastructure issues. India doesn't have the infrastructure. The Chinese government, as much as, we don't like the form of government and we don't like how they control things, is extremely effective. They want to build 10 airports, and in a year they have 10 more airports. They want to build railways, and in a year they've got thousands of kilometers of railways. And most of the other countries that we would be looking at are just not in that position. They don't have the effective top-down government management. They don't have the money. They don't have the capability. So it really kind of puts companies in a catch-22 situation of, you want to move, and then I've had clients call and say, find me suppliers in Vietnam, during the trade war, and we do, but then the suppliers in Vietnam buy their raw materials from China. So it's not easy, right? We wish it was easy, but it's not easy.
Okay, I promise you, Maria, I'll get to your question in just a minute, but I want to talk about a third option for supply chains, which is our neighbors to the south. I mean, those of us who remember the original NAFTA discussions, and people talk about that giant sucking sound to the south. Is that an option? Do you anticipate the USMCA will increase trade among the North American partners and replace some of the trade that we're doing with Asian countries, or is it going to stay at similar levels to what we see right now?
I could start. Is that for Kim or me?
No, go ahead.
I thought a lot about this. It's definitely going to stay the same, and it's going to get better because the U.S. government, with the tariffs out of China, and we're hearing that they're actually going to be more and they're going to be increased. They're going to make it impossible for all these companies to do business with China. So they're going to look elsewhere, and they're going to look locally if they can. So, labor is high in Canada. Mexico is a little bit less, but I see it's going to increase. That's my thought on it. I said it's not going to happen overnight, but it's definitely going to happen.
Yeah, I think it's, I've seen a lot of my clients over the years as the overall supply chain has become more complex. They often have, regionalization. They have a factory in Mexico that supplies North and South America. They have a plant in China that supplies Asia. They have a plant in Poland that supplies Europe, that kind of thing. And I think that we're going to see more regionalization by the companies that can. If you're large enough, if you have enough market, that you can manage to do that. So, because we've all seen for various reasons for many years now, the risks of having a very defined supply chain that doesn't allow any flexibility. So I think that's a very strong motive to having these regionals. The problem is that you don't have that your supplier could move to Mexico, but their sub-suppliers aren't there, or the raw materials aren't there. So it's become so fragmented and single production based, so many manufacturing chains, that it's not as easy to pick a plant up and move it because it's dependent on 30 other submaterial suppliers. But I do think Mexico has benefited, and Mexico has problems. So I have clients that have plants in Mexico and China, and they move back and forth. They bulk everything up in China, and they ramp down Mexico when Mexico's struggling. When China's got problems, they ramp up Mexico and slow down China. But again, you have to be a fairly big-sized company to be able to do that.
Excellent. Going back to you, Samantha, one of the other tools that people were asking about are Google and Google Meets. Is that a good way for communicating online with your suppliers or your clients?
Yes. I mean, I would say that any of those platforms would probably do the trick. I would just communicate with your suppliers, distributors, partners, see what they're most comfortable with, because they might not feel comfortable with Zoom because of all of the hype behind it, of it maybe not being as secure as people think, or maybe they're more comfortable on WhatsApp or Microsoft Teams. So I would just talk directly to your partners or who you're trying to speak to, and see where they feel most comfortable.
I'm curious whether culturally, do other countries feel as comfortable doing face-to-face on phone as, or at least online, as they would be using the phone previously? I mean, or would people, do some places really prefer just to talk online? They don't want really to have to see somebody's living room or their office in the background, or worry about, is my hair going to be looking good when I talk to my potential customer? I mean, how does that change culturally around the world, or does it?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely varies between cultures, between industries. Like, I'm in the tech industry, so I can be in a t-shirt and no one will bat an eye. But if you are maybe in the legal industry, or something that's a bit more professional, then maybe that kind of video speaking wouldn't attract them as much. But I mean, I can say that from from the companies that we've spoken to, like Latin Americans, they don't mind. They like the face-to-face interaction. They love being social. They love seeing people. So video is great. And I spoke to a partner that said that she's been sending out like a letter and a piece of chocolate to her people in Latin America, because it just adds to that like personal touch, even though she can't go and see them. It adds that next level of just that personal touch.
One other thing, culturally, a lot of cultures, there's one of the cultural definitions is, and especially in language and how language influences culture, is how important context is in communicating. And high context languages do better when they have body language and facial impressions to look at. So Arabic and a lot of Asian languages are high context languages. The caveat of that is that some of those same high context language cultures also struggle with what your intention is when you're talking. So if you're sending me something in writing, I have time to think about what you meant and what you're asking me and how I want to respond. Whereas if you're communicating with me on the phone or via Zoom, then I have to respond to you in the moment. And sometimes that's difficult for me to do, because I call high context thinking soap opera thinking. So high context thinking is you're thinking about every single thing that person isn't saying and what they might have meant and who else they were talking to. And if that's all circling around your brain at the same time that you're trying to answer something, that it's going to make you hesitate to answer. So definitely Zoom calls are better than phone calls, because at least I can see you. But some things it would be better for me to have writing, because then I have time to prepare a response.
Excellent. Well, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We've gone a little bit over, but I think that's because people have been so interested in what our three terrific speakers have had to say. So I'll give people online one last chance to get their question in. But otherwise, I'd like to thank Kim, Samantha, and George for sharing their time this afternoon. After this event, I'll be posting it online somehow. This is, again, new for us, and so I've recorded it, but how I actually get it up will be another question. But I'll let everyone know when that happens, and I will also send around the contact information for our three speakers so that you can follow up with them later on. I'd like to, again, thank my friends from the District Export Council who are on the phone, Julia Montgomery and Mary Robbins, as well as recognize Mike Cooney, who is on here from Enterprise Florida and can tell you about all the great grant programs that they have to help Florida businesses take advantage of the learning you've just had today in how to export and how to get those supply chains started. So thank you very much, everyone, and I wish everyone a great rest of the week.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.